Well, you knew today was coming. If I had an opportunity to cross over grindcore and toys, you know I was going to do it. Let's talk about some Napalm Death figures.
Hey, kid. Yeah, you. Everyone thinks toys are fun, but this is a channel for adults. Yeah, I said it. If you're under the age of 18, go get your parents before you come in here. If you're under the age of 13, scram! Let's get on with the show.
It's my hope that this video is going to reach both grindcore fans and toy fans. And because I can't do a video that caters to just one or the other, you're going to get a little bit of everything here. There are going to be Napalm Death fans that don't collect toys or maybe only dabble, that are going to be more interested in the figure itself. And there are going to be toy collectors that don't know a damn thing about grindcore or Napalm Death or what this noisy crap is that I'm talking about. It is my hope that will give you both a little bit of something. To any grindcore fans that are coming across this video and want to know about the toys, I've got your back. But we have to initiate some people that, well, are uninitiated and don't know anything about grindcore, the band Napalm Death, or the album Scum. And it's really important to paint this picture because I have some things to talk to both toy collectors and grindcore fans about why this is a really interesting, odd, and concerning choice for Super7 to make. But let's start with a little bit of background on Napalm Death, grindcore, and the album Scum. Grindcore is a genre that for the most part came out of a very specific subsect of bands. Repulsion is arguably the first, Napalm Death being the second, or kind of along the same lines. Hardcore grindheads are going to know that Repulsion is more or less regarded as the progenitor of the grindcore genre. Guys in Napalm Death admit to listening to a lot of Repulsion, and certainly Siege, which was an influence on everybody. But to most people, to the average music listener or just citizen, if you will, Napalm Death is probably the most closely associated with grindcore as a genre to this day. So don't worry, you don't have to get out your keyboards and tell me that Napalm Death's not the first grind band or the first one to record the blast beat. That honor belongs to SOD as far as I'm concerned on the song Milk. But even that can be hotly debated. That's not what this video is about. Napalm Death originally formed in the very early 80s, some say 83, in Birmingham, England, as part of the anarcho-punk kind of post-punk movement that was happening at the time, which was running concurrently with what most Americans would know as the hardcore scene in the early 80s, infused with a little bit of metal along the way.
I mean, a lot of the story of the grindcore thing really does come out of the hardcore punk scene in the UK.
They started off very dissonant, very bleak, and not the fastest band in the world at that time. They clearly had some very, anarchic ideas about corporations, government, control, things of that nature. All of these ideations in society that are designed to control the masses for the greater good of, the rich few. Birmingham itself being very blue-collar, very labor-driven, it's not a surprise that a lot of the bands that we now consider to be classic in heavy metal, punk, and grindcore scenes kind of had a bit of a problem with authority.
This one, my friends, It's about that person you know, those people you know, who walk into a room, manage to hate everybody, hate everything.
From the very beginning, Napalm Death was very focused on humanitarian, equal rights, anti-government, freedom, that sort of a thing.
Napalm is a paradox, as are many other bands of this ilk. We have very, very aggressive, extreme, violent sounding, which is the important part, music. But on the other side of things, the lyrics are peaceful, tolerant, humane. People say it's a political band, and I wouldn't necessarily discount that. But at the same time, I also understand that politics can also mean nothing. It can be very tokenistic, very divisive. The starting point is to bring people together, not force them apart. So my thing is, the underlying thing for me is a humane, humanitarian standpoint.
With happiness and fucking dignity. Everybody fucking deserves it.
It was very punk in that regard. I mean, that's where it came from. And they were moving closer and closer musically from that kind of bleak Swans, Joy Division kind of sound into something a little bit more metallic as they're getting into bands like Venom and Motorhead and so forth. And at that point, they part ways with their original drummer and then move in with a guy named Mick Harris, who at that point really was the focal point of Napalm for the next 4 years. Incidentally, Mick is one of the biggest influences on my drumming style that there is. I want to give Mick a shout out if by some weird chance he happens to see this. I love you. I love everything you've done. Thanks for all of your contributions to music. Appreciate you. After a few lineup changes with Mick added to the mix on drums, Napalm Death went into an 8-track studio called Rich Bitch to record what would become the A-side of Scum, but with the intention of it being the first side of a split record with another band. It's very commonplace in punk and hardcore scenes, and is certainly a mainstay of many different genres to this day. But once they recorded it, they weren't seeing a lot of forward momentum, and this is where Digby Pearson from Earache Records comes in.
Justin basically gave me the tapes and said, well, sold them to me. And I'm like, right, but now I need the B-side. So Mick Harris was kind of left on his own, and he recruited Lee Dorian, Bill Steer.
As Mick got a new lineup together, the idea was, let's do another recording and have an A and B side. So that's kind of the way it turned out.
I mean, it's two different bands, Mick Harris being the only constant, a bit crazier.
Mick, knowing they had something really interesting going and still wanting to move further into extremity, grabs Bill Steer, who was just starting Carcass at the time, Lee Dorian, who would later form Cathedral, and then unknown Jim Whiteley on bass. The four of them constructed and slapdashed, a bunch of songs, 16 if memory serves, and with just maybe one full rehearsal as a band and one writing session with Mick and Bill to go in and recorded what would later be known as Side B of Scum. The toy collectors out there at this point are going like, what's all this about music? I just want to hear about the toy. Trust me, this all links together. Stay with me. Having completed Side B of Scum to great effect, now they have a full record that they entitled Scum. Get a black and white cover together, Earache Records puts it out, and it just does gangbusters.
All the hardcore kids were like, man, you heard this fucking Scum record? It's completely ridiculous.
Play side 2 first. Play side 2. Don't play side 1. Side 1 kind of sucks. Play side 2. And I'm like, really? What's it like? He's like, oh man, it sounds like fucking Popeye screaming at people.
Yes, side A is definitely much more from the anarcho-punk roots. Side B was moving much more into metal and getting influenced by a lot of what was going on in the really underground scene at the time. However, I don't think it's fair to split them like that. I think they're part of a cohesive work. And one of the fascinating things is it does actually come across so well, spanning between the two. You don't put side A on and hear something radically different to side B. Side A continued into side B and it was a natural evolution.
Things definitely started to take off. I don't think Earache half expected it. The response that they got, they only pressed X amount. I believe Digby printed 1,500 or 3,000 of Scum. And
how many did it sell eventually?
It still sells. That's a figure that I'll never know, and I don't think anybody will ever know, to be quite honest.
Scum itself made a huge impact on the scene. No one had heard anything like this before.
It was kind of a music that, it was a new style of music, but it actually appealed to a cross-section of people.
It pushed the boundaries, it started something. As much as you can hear influences on there, a mix of this, that and the other, we started something and we just pushed it to the next level, and I'm proud to have been a part of doing that.
John Peel of BBC Radio got it on the air and people just went nuts for it. But despite all of the media attention,
a bit too angry for me, a bit too aggressive, a bit too doom-laden, a bit too subversive. So let's lighten the mood here a little. Madness on the BBC. Was that it?
Yep, basically.
How come songs that are so short?
I mean, well, them sort of songs don't represent the band as it is today. I mean, like, that was like short and to the point for a purpose.
What were the lyrics in that?
You suffer, but why?
Despite the fact that they were really changing music, not just in the UK, but in the world, it wasn't enough for everybody. And people moved on again.
They couldn't really see beyond playing to like 60 people. In their minds, and in everyone's mind really, it was a small scene. How could it ever get bigger?
I didn't really see it as having much longevity, which sounds ridiculous now, obviously, but that's kind of how I looked at it.
Lee and Bill had left after a Japanese tour for various reasons. Shane and Mickey knew what I could do.
We thought Barney would be a good person to come in because he had a lot of energy.
Barney, better known as Mark Greenway, the vocalist of Napalm Death to this day, kind of helped save the band. Mick would later leave for creative differences, and the core lineup of the band is more or less the same since, around 1991. And when you consider that Napalm Death is still active without a single original member in it, but as an institution has remained mostly unchanged for the last 30 years.
I always say that, if you look at the history of heavy music in the UK, first there was Black Sabbath, then Judas Priest, then Iron Maiden. Those three bands are, obviously extremely important. And after them, the most important band ever to come out of this country is Napalm Death. And, they've influenced thousands of bands. You can hear the influence of what they do in so much music that's around now. But I don't think anybody, maybe only a couple of bands spring to mind that have ever really captured the energy and the aggression of the early Napalm Death stuff.
It's hard to overstate how much Napalm Death were the scene and the flag bearers. That's their legacy at the end of the day.
I think it's feasible and understandable why a company like Super7 would seek to create a collectible of this particular record. But again, probably not that simple. By this point, Super7 has put out toys for a lot of different toy lines that didn't exist in the 3 3/4 inch scale with the 5 points of articulation. And, they've been successful to varying degrees, but the toys themselves are pieces of art. The card back, the figure, everything comes together in a total package. As many have stated, I don't see the point of taking these types of figures out of the packaging because they're being presented in a nostalgic way that's meant to be an entire piece of creative work. By itself, I am 100% on board with this. I think it's a great idea in general to be able to get toys that you didn't have before or to commemorate certain great people in pop culture in a way that is aesthetically pleasing, can be a novelty in a music collector's room, or can be a novelty in a toy collector's room for very different reasons. By this point, they've done Slayer, Motorhead, Ghost, a bunch of different bands, and interesting choices from not just the individuals in the band, but sometimes pieces of album covers, and it's kind of gone all over the shop. On the surface, I admire the creativity. Now, when we come to the series of toys that are commemorating Napalm Death's Scum releases, it gets a little bit, muddy. The original cover of Napalm Death's Scum is a bleak cover. You've got a demon overlooking 4 to 5 white businessmen in business suits, and they are themselves looking down on a bunch of African or indigenous people that are clearly being, in some ways, ignored, marginalized, in some cases exploited at the hands of these multinational corporations that are globalizing and dividing the world in a different way. They're trying to unify brands and corporations at the expense of marginalizing and exploiting people. That's what the album cover really speaks to with regard to me. Part of why I'm a huge fan of that artwork and a lot of artwork from similar bands at the time and later. You know, in 1987, this scrappy little band's trying to warn about corporate globalization. And if you look at 1987 versus today, and some of the fandoms that are out there that are affected by this, and food, and how that relates to health, I mean, it's a pretty poignant message, and something that's very important to remember historically. You know, the bottom of the album cover has a pile of skulls all around it, probably just to signify like the unnecessary deaths of people that aren't getting the assistance that they could get through humanitarian means. Meanwhile, these corporations that are just globalizing and making trillions of dollars in profit, and that's not an exaggeration, when this money that they're making, even just a tiny sliver of it being put into humanitarian efforts, especially at that time in places like Africa and the Middle East and parts of Asia, would have made a big difference in the quality of life of these people that they're just trying to live. And if you look closely, inside of this pile of skulls are logos of a lot of major corporations of the day. McDonald's, IBM, Mercedes, you know, take a look. There's a bunch in here. And it's a really, really stark portrayal of, you know, what was happening at the time. A very chilling message, but an important one. Now, I'm not necessarily done with these points yet, but I needed to establish the groundwork prior to looking at the toy itself. So you've waited long enough. Let me show you a couple of the toys based on the album cover for Scum. These are the Napalm Death Scum figures as they exist from Super 7. This is the original, this is the exclusive from Earache, and there are more on the way. This is what I have. Let's talk about them. This is the original version of the album cover with the yellow color on the background. You can see that the figure itself has a pretty interesting sculpt. You know, your 5 points of articulation. You take a lot of creative liberties with the, you know, character on the album cover versus the actual figure, but more on that later. The back showcases some very old artwork, some lyrics, and although it does show the album cover, there's a little bit of the bottom missing, which we'll talk about in a bit. This is the Earache exclusive orange variant, and the only real differences here are the paint deco, which is, well, more orange. The eye sockets are black as opposed to yellow on the original, and all the color highlights on the packaging are orange. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. So yeah, did you notice anything there? So all they did for this card back was take a vertical slice of the album, which, you know, to a point that makes sense. But they squished it in such a way so that the bottom shows next to no corporate imagery at all. And they put this yellow backing to make the figure pop, probably. But it also conspicuously covers up the majority of the businessmen and completely obscures the native indigenous folks that are on that cover. So this was meant to be an advocacy for, you know, people in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And when the toy comes out, delivered by a corporation, these people are conspicuously absent to the point where the entire point of the album cover is completely glossed over and completely missed. All we're left with is this demon figure that overlooks the entire scene without getting the totality of what that was supposed to mean at the time. They do appear to show the album cover on the back of the card back, but it looks a little sanitized, and maybe I'm just reading too much into this because of how I feel about this as an entire product. What I'm saying is it looks cropped, and they may have cleaned up and taken away some of the iconography on the album cover. That's what I see. Now, I realize some of you are out there going, Jim, it's just a fucking action figure. Like, what are you worried about? Well, I'm sorry. This is something I'm very passionate about. This band, this movement, these ideas are a huge part of, my formative years and things that I am very passionate about. Because I do feel that for all the money that is made in the name of capitalism, that you probably could stand to share a little bit more with the people that have absolutely nothing. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to get political here, but this is more my feelings come from on this subject. So when a corporation like Super7 makes a series of action figures to commemorate this tome of humanitarianism and leaves out the most starkly rich attributes of the artwork that are humanitarian in nature, it really makes me stop and think, what? They're missing the point. Just having the demon, which, although important and obscuring everything else, you're taking things out of context, and you're making a very surface level pass at commemorating something that was meant to have a deeper meaning, both in terms of music history and the message they were trying to convey. And I think that's very irresponsible, because the idea here is that the real demons were these businessmen, these heads of multinational corporations. The demon was just a symbol. So to glorify the demon is kind of a weird flex, as the kids say. Bear in mind that because of these things, and I noticed them before I purchased them, I was really on the fence about buying these figures. Now, as far as I know, Earache Records still owns exclusive rights to that first Napalm Death record, among others, which, that's a whole other video to talk about. But what I think that means, from what I understand, from what I've read and what I've heard from the band themselves, I've met them on several occasions, Earache can more or less do whatever they want with the imagery and recordings of those first few records. And Napalm doesn't really have a say in it. And I don't even think that they get a cut of the money. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Either way, it's clear that Earache licensed this out to make a little extra cash, which on its surface is like, fair enough, you own the IP, you can do what you want with it. But then for Super7 to do this and kind of pervert the meaning of the artwork really does not sit well with me. Earache clearly is on board with this because they have licensed it, and they had an exclusive version, the orange variant, on their website, which I picked up along with the original yellow version, as you saw earlier. And they've got more coming. They've got the teal version, and presumably they're going to have a couple more colors, because there's about 3 more. There's a lime green one and a purple one. And yeah, I'm probably going to get the purple one, because that's the one that my first copy of the album officially was purple when I got it on CD, because I don't think they're going to release a version of the toy that looks like a cassette tape. And I really do struggle with this. I really do struggle with this. It feels like I'm supporting the band, but I know in my head I'm probably not. I'm more supporting the record company, who've done some pretty dastardly things in the past to the band. And I'm also supporting Super7, who, in their presentation of these toys, has really made a mockery of what the band stands for. And yet, I'm a toy collector that adores Napalm Death so much, it's hard to separate that want for that product from my principles about it. And just owning these toys makes me a hypocrite. And I am certain that depending upon what your fandoms are and what properties you tend to lean into the most, there is probably a product somewhere in your collection, regardless of what you collect, that represents a similar, split of ethics versus desire in you. And I encourage you to analyze that and let me know if there's something you find that crosses that line for you, okay? Because I'm talking about, I wear these shirts and these hats all the time. I always go directly to the band. Well, a band's not going to necessarily make these kind of toys directly, and certainly in this case, we know for a fact they did not. And I'd feel much better about it if they did. In as much as far as if they made it, I would get it, I would own it, I'd be happy. But under these circumstances, it really does stink of hypocrisy for me to own this. So to be completely honest, I don't know how long they're going to stay in my collection. I might have just enough beer one day and get just disgusted enough with myself that I either throw them in the trash or sell them to someone at cost. Because every time I look at them, I'm both reminded of a great time in history, but also how little we've progressed since then as a society. Now, I realize that's probably a huge downer to everyone watching right now. Napalm Death fans are like, those are really... Oh, yeah, that's a good point. And chances are there are toy collectors going, you know what, those are pretty... Oh, man. I realize this is probably a bit of a downer to everyone watching, whether you're a music fan or a toy collector or both. But the more that I was leading up to this video about these toys, the more I was thinking about these things, and it would be really irresponsible of me as someone who is this into this music and these cultures to not force you to think about this. Not just with the Napalm Death Scum figures, but with anything that you're buying. You really need to learn, in my opinion anyway, you need to learn to be able to separate desire from your politics or ethics to a certain degree and analyze them separately, and be able to come to a place where you feel comfortable with any purchase you're making. It's no different when you go to the grocery store, whatever you're wearing, whatever. Some people don't care, and power to you. Live your life the way you want to. It's a free world. But if you are someone that concerns themselves with something being cruelty-free at the grocery store, or something similar along those lines with many other products, and whether it be organic or whatever, toys are no different. And granted, the manufacturing practices of a lot of these items that we love do have questionable labor practices and things like that. And there are certain lines that you're already crossing morally that you may not even think about, or ethically. And although I can sit here and agonize about these particular toys, let's face it, if you collect toys or even certain kind of music, the manufacturing practices themselves are very divorced from ethics much of the time. So we've probably already crossed a line of morality a long time ago when we started collecting these types of things. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves about how far across that line we're willing to go before it's too much. And although I know I'm making a mountain out of a molehill to some of you, the way they're treating this particular product really does feel like it's a little too far. And I know, I realize how that sounds, because all I would really require of them for me not to have this kind of really deep-seated concern over this is if they just had the entire artwork somewhere on the packaging, or they would acknowledge publicly that, look, we know how much this album means to a lot of people and what it represents ethically in terms of its message. But when it came to the packaging, because of there's certain retail limits and, you know, basically I realized that they blanked all this stuff out so they could put it on shelves in a wide variety of stores. I get that. I just wish they would acknowledge that publicly. Because if they would at least admit, yeah, we did this because we knew it wouldn't sell otherwise, we couldn't put it on store shelves, which is a very corporate move, but they're a corporation. What the hell do you expect? If there were some acknowledgement, I would probably feel okay. So at least they're not trying to pull a fast one at that point. And this isn't meant to be some kind of a, like, Super7, you naughty, you should have known better. I mean, they should have known better, but that's not what I'm saying. This is just me talking about my conflict, my concerns about this kind of merchandising and the irony, the absolute irony of an anti-corporate album, probably the definitive anti-corporate album, having a commemorative toy being put out by a corporation that covers up and almost denies the anti-corporate sentiment of the album the toy is based on. Blows my freaking mind. Now, at the end of the day, if you like Napalm Death, you like Scum, and you like toys, and you want to buy these, go for it. All I ask is that you're honest with yourself about what that might mean. But I've been a downer long enough. You know, as a product, these toys look great. I'm sure they're going to come out in a billion different colors, just like the album itself did. And like I said, I will probably cherry pick through them and get the ones that I like the most. But I will also probably end up burning them, selling them, or throwing them away at some point in a fit of rage.
Very, very aggressive, extreme, violent sounding, which is the important part.
In the meantime, may your card backs be straight, may all your grinds be merry, and may you be able to find anything you're looking for at any given time at a price you feel is reasonable, both financially and ethically. Cheers. Special thanks to our patrons and members who you're seeing on the screen now. Thank you so much for your support. It really helps.